Go for the pulls and the pools. Go for the oohs and the ahs. Go for the bubbles and the bubbly. Go for the story and the stories. Go for the win. Go to Ocean Casino Resort. Book your trip at theoceanac.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to another edition of Football 24/7. I'm here with John McMullen, and this is JAKIB Sports. We appreciate you guys. Make sure you smash that like button. Make sure you guys remain engaged in the content. So much to talk about, so little time. So let's just hop right into it, John. The obvious news of the day. The Philadelphia Eagles decided to part ways with Darius Slay. Can you please give us the 411 on that update?
Yeah, well, it's not official yet. So obviously Darius said goodbye earlier today. His wife said goodbye to Philadelphia earlier today. The Eagles have not made it official yet. And evidently Darius is out there getting fans' hopes up. But all indications, NFL source, that was the plan. And the Eagles are going to move on with the post-June 1st designation. Nothing's official till it's official. So we'll continue to monitor that. And, minutes ago, the Eagles were able to bring back Fletcher Cox on a one-year deal for $10 million. So, a bit of a hometown discount for the Eagles and Fletcher Cox. And I think it was more important, especially after losing Javon Hargrave, because it would have been difficult to replace them both. Now the Eagles at least have that one defensive tackle that can sort of play three technique, 4-eye, and be pretty successful. So Fletcher Cox back in the fold. Darius Slay, $26 million cap number. That was the issue. Eagles had to get it down. Darius, 32 years old, final year of his contract, still playing at a Pro Bowl level, wanted an extension at a similar number. Remember, he's making $16-17 million. The Eagles just re-signed James Bradberry. So to pay two cornerbacks, top of the market value, that was always going to be really, really difficult. But doors sliver, but door open, because Slay's out there on Twitter saying you never know to some fans. But I doubt it.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It kind of reminds me of the Fletcher Cox situation last season when they cut him and they brought him back. But I'm not sure if that's a similar situation. I think Darius Slay is still trying to be paid like a top tier corner. And, don't get me wrong, Darius Slay is still, in my opinion, I think Darius Slay is still a top 10 corner in this NFL. But he's definitely starting to fall down that ladder, mainly just because of age. And that's just the reality of the situation. But try to walk us through exactly what went wrong between the Philadelphia Eagles and Darius Slay. Why couldn't they work this thing out? Why couldn't this thing get done behind closed doors without social media and so on and so forth getting involved?
Well, it's difficult. You have to make difficult decisions. I mean, the old adage in really sports, not just the NFL, is you'd rather give up on a player a year early than a year late. So basically, Slay wants a 2-year extension on top of this year at $16 million, $17 million a year. And I think the Eagles are fine paying him for this year as long as they can get that cap number down. The cap number's 26. If they could have done that, the Eagles would have said, let's run it back, even with the two big numbers at the cornerback position. But Slay's not going to do that without an extension. The Eagles don't want to pay a 34-year-old cornerback 16, $17 million a year. At that point, it's very unlikely he's going to continue to play at the level he's playing at right now. So better to give up a year too early than a year too late is the axiom. Now, you look at Fletcher Cox and say he's 32. Why is he back? Well, he's back on a one-year deal for $10 million, which is less than a one-year deal for $14 million. Brandon Graham is back on a one-year deal for $6 million. And that's a pay cut from what he was making last year. Jason Kelsey got a little bit of a raise, but, he's staying playing at an all-pro level. So it's always, each situation is different. The Eagles would have had no problem paying Darius Slay his $17.5 million this year, but they had to get the cap number down. And he wouldn't do that without the extension. And that's where you get your loggerheads.
So you said he wouldn't get that. He wouldn't do that. He wouldn't restructure without the extension. So does that imply that if the Eagles would have restructured his deal, he would have lost leverage in the situation, correct?
No, it's not necessarily about leverage. You never want to go into a lame duck season. There's only two reasons players go into lame duck seasons. And this would have been a lame duck season for Darius, which means the 1 year left, end of a contract. You do that if you have to, and you're not a star player, number one, or number two, sort of what happened to James Bradberry last year. You're a salary cap casualty somewhere else. You got to sign a lower contract than what you had, but you want to get right back on the market. So you sign a prove-it deal. Well, Slay's not doing either of those things because he's a Pro Bowl corner. As you mentioned, he's still a top 10 corner in this league. He's not going to be a lame duck. He's not going to sign for a prove-it deal at this stage, playing it the way he's playing, and rightfully so. Now, that's why the Eagles gave Drew Rosenhaus permission to go seek a trade, which was really, that's how it was worded. It's really not seek a trade as so much, all right, see what his market is. Go talk to other teams, because the Eagles are thinking most other teams, it's a calculated gamble, but they're thinking most other teams are like them. You don't want to pay a 32-year-old cornerback $18 million. That's not how you do business in this particular league. And that was the Eagles' feeling. Strategy, they couldn't work things out. As things are scheduled now, he's set to be released. We'll see if that comes to fruition.
Yeah, and it also doesn't make it any easier when you see a guy like Stephon Gilmore, a former Defensive Player of the Year, a former All-Pro himself, get traded from the Colts, and his contract is significantly lesser than a Darius Slay. I think he has a base salary of maybe $7 or $8 million.
Well, that's why he's easier to trade.
Exactly, that's my point. So I think that's the situation where the Philadelphia Eagles kind of struggled. It's hard to trade that $17 million contract, and when you think about the fact that his contract was still Stephon Gilmore's contract was so tradable, and they only got a 5th-round pick for him, that begs the question, what could the Eagles have gotten for Darius Slay with the $17 million contract? That complicates things even more.
Yeah, probably not much, and that's the problem. See, here's the deal. If the Eagles plan on cutting Darius Slay with a post-June 1st designation. And
what exactly does that mean, for the layman?
That means you can split the dead money over 2 seasons. And what it means for Slay's contract is basically you're saving $17.5 million against the cap of that $26 million, and you're getting 8.6 or somewhere around that range dead money. That's post June 1st. Now, if you just cut him today and said we're done with him, and didn't put the post June 1st, everything accelerates into this year's cap, and you're only saving $3.7 million, and you have 22+ million of dead money. Same with the trade. So, in other words, if they trade Darius Slay today, they would still be taking that hit, that dead money hit on their cap.
The
So
26
if
million.
they get, yeah, so if they get not 26, 22,
22,
but
excuse me.
if they get a 6th round pick, a 7th round pick, would you rather have that, or would you rather just cut them post June 1st and get 17.5 million against the cap? That's what the Eagles are saying. They'd rather have that 17.5 million on June 1st than a 6th or a 7th round pick.
Hey, it's all about the business. You know, it's so funny, right? James Bradberry got this really decent contract from the Philadelphia Eagles. And, you know, a lot of people say, you know, James Bradberry had the better season between him and Darius Slay. And sure, Darius Slay, his play kind of tapered off towards the end. I think what you like to call it is a regression to the mean. It's kind of hard to play at that level that he played at in the first half of the season continuously over a 17-game span. You'd go into the playoffs, make that a 20-game span, right? It's kind of hard to maintain that level of play, especially at the age of 32. Now, the reason I mentioned James Bradberry is because James Bradberry is a player who isn't really known for his man-to-man ability, isn't really known for his speed, but he's known for his savviness. He's known for his ability to understand route running and leverage, and he's just an extremely intelligent corner. And that translates well, especially as you begin to age. Let's be honest about this. James Bradberry's success was closely related to Darius Slay's success. And a guy like James Bradberry, who didn't really have to defend too many number one receivers, or if at all, last season, he's coming into the season with a new contract, and there's a lot of pressure on that guy. Now, it all depends if the Eagles go and get another corner in the draft, but still, James Bradberry will be the veteran in the room, and he may be expected to defend the number one receiver on any given Sunday. How do you feel about that for James Bradberry, knowing what we know about his 2022 campaign and how he mainly spent most of his time on the number 2 wide receivers?
I don't think that's necessarily true. There were small situations, most notably Justin Jefferson, where the Eagles, kind of let Slay handle him, and it was very successful. And I think everybody was excited about that game, and rightfully so. But they were also letting him play that day, and Slay joked, you could have had 3-4 interceptions. You also could have had 4 penalties if it were a different officiating staff. So very rarely, arguably Jefferson's the best receiver in football. That's why they went that route. Very rarely did the Eagles travel cornerbacks because they play, mainly quarters, cover 6, cover 2, mainly zone coverage. And in the Super Bowl, when they went away from that, they weren't very successful. So I don't think you're going to have a ton of traveling with the receiver, with the so-called number one receiver. They're still going to play the same defensive philosophy.
Playing with Darius Slay, and sorry to cut you off, John, but I have to make note of this. Although what you're saying is very true, they didn't do, if any at all, traveling in the 2022 season. But still, playing with Darius Slay, playing with CJ Gardner-Johnson, playing with that very potent pass rush the Philadelphia Eagles have, that makes James Bradberry's jobs easier, does it not?
Well, yeah. I mean, Jonathan Gannon would tell you every week, rush and cover and rush. If you get a big rush, it makes things easier for a corner, or if you guys, the corners lock people down, it makes it easier for the pass rush. It sort of works both ways. Obviously, the Eagles had a tremendous pass rush. So that certainly helped the coverage, and they were the number one pass defense in the NFL. All 3 corners played well. James played very well.
I agree.
Avante played very well when he was out there. Darius played very well. arguably the best trio in the league. It's just really hard to pay two corners. I mean, Slay, I think, is, let me look it up really quick, number 8 when it came to contracts, 8th highest in the NFL. And now you have Bradberry, who I believe is 17th. That's a lot of money for cornerbacks. You can pay one, but you probably can't pay the other. And most of us, including me, thought, all right, well, they're going to run things out with Slay and let Bradberry walk. But now they're going to get Bradberry back and let Slay walk. So either way, you weren't paying two. It's you only have a certain amount of assets and finances, and you have to allocate it, and it's hard to pay corners, two corners, top 20 level.
So let me ask you
very
this.
difficult.
Because they paid Bradberry and they decided to move on from Slay, it begs the question, which corner they valued more. Clearly, they gave the money to Bradberry, but I understand there's an age difference between the two. James Bradberry, 29. He'll be 30 when the season actually starts. Darius Slay is 32, going on 33 come January 1st of 2024. But I have to ask you, was this decision to commit to Bradberry and not commit more money to Slay, was this decision strictly about age, or was it something more?
Mainly about age, but not strictly about age. As I said, it's about more than 2023. Slay wanted an extension. So you're not talking $17.5 million in 2023. He wanted $17.5 million and another, maybe he comes down to $15 million. Maybe that's the compromise for the age. Say for another 2 years, all of a sudden, that's 34, 35-year-old cornerback. So I get it from both sides. I get it from Slay's standpoint. He's still playing at a high level. Doesn't want a lame duck year. That's his leverage. He knows the Eagles want to get the cap number down. And he's willing to do that, but only if he gets an extension. So that was his leverage. And from the Eagles' perspective, they're like, we love you. We want you back. You're our guy. You're a team captain, but we need to get that cap number down. Let's give you all the money up front. Let's put a couple voidable years back on there, and then we'll talk again next year, was probably what the Eagles came back with. And he said no. He and his agent said no, thinking they can get similar money somewhere else. And we'll see if they can.
No, you bring up a good point. When you put it from that perspective, I don't think anyone in any business will want to enter their final year of their contract with a company or their employer not knowing what their future holds. And like you said, I can't really. I'm not mad at Darius Slay. I'm always about a player getting their money, especially in the NFL, a league that's not forgiving. I'm always about a player getting their money. So you can't really get too mad about Darius Slay wanting to ask for more money, especially when the proofs in the pudding is coming off a Pro Bowl season. It's kind of hard to argue against a guy like that, right?
Yeah, and there's different phases. Like we all know, Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox are now on that phase of their career where they're year to year. So they're more accepting. Fletcher was not happy when he got put on that and got cut last year and came back for $14 million, which is still a big number. Now he's down to $10 million. As I said, Brandon is now down to $6 million. But Fletcher's 32. Brandon's going to be 35. It's what happens. 30 is a dirty word in this league, Tone. Dirty word.
It's funny. I'm 28, and I always say to people, man, I'm around the corner from 30, and it scares me, and just in everyday life. So I totally understand what you mean by that.
I'd love to be 30.
Bringing Fletcher Cox back means more, right, than just having a friendly cap number, right? I think it was imperative for him to come back to have another year with Jordan Davis, because this is going to be a big year for Jordan Davis. Can you speak on just the overall impact of having a guy like Fletcher Cox back in the room, along with BG, right? That defensive line can definitely still use the veteran leadership.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles play, the multiple fronts, the 50 front, the 40 front, and the 50s where you have the nose tackle, where you have Jordan Davis. So the 40 front, whether it's 3 technique, 4-eye technique, that was Fletcher and Javon. That's their role. Linball was a nose tackle, and Dominican Sue, 3 technique, 4-eye. So they're different positions. And you don't want to lose both Javon and Fletcher Cox. You needed one of them back. Hopefully Milton Williams can step up and play more reps, but getting Fletcher back is bigger than people realize, because they knew they weren't getting Javon back, because Javon was going to cash in, and he did. He got $21 million a year, and I can't blame the Eagles from walking away from that. But
yeah, I can't blame him from walking towards it. You know what I mean?
Oh no, hell no. But the Eagles are disciplined. But to replace 2 of those guys, and it's weird because Fletcher is one of the best defensive players in this franchise's history. But for whatever reason, there's a lot of people that, want to move on.
Why do you think that is? Because again, like you said, Fletcher Cox has given the Philadelphia Eagles a lot of good years. He was a key contributor on that Super Bowl, campaign.
I never, though. There's certain guys the fan base latches on to, and there's certain guys they don't. And I don't, they love Fletcher when Fletcher was, the second best defensive tackle in football. But now that he's just a good player, I guess it's because of the way he did play at his apex when he was great, and he's not that pet player anymore. I don't know. I guess.
Do you think? I want to try to take it a step further with you. When it comes to Fletcher's career, because some would say Fletcher could have been better, could have been more in shape, could have just been more. Could have been as elite as an Aaron Donald. Granted, they played the position a little differently.
Well, that's just silly. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I'm kind of winding you up right now.
Aaron Donald is one of the greatest defensive players who ever lived. And certainly he's right there with J.J. Watt when you talk about defensive players with this generation. Who's the best? He's going to the Hall of Fame, first ballot Hall of Famer. Fletcher is. And by the way, they're different players. Aaron's very undersized, very quick, traditional 3 technique. Fletcher's a lot bigger. He can play that. He can play different. He can play 4-eye. He can play 5. He has with Chip Kelly. A little bit more versatile, if anything, because of his size, where Aaron has to play sort of 3 technique to be effective. But we're talking about Fletcher made the all-decade team in the 2010s. We're talking about all pros. I don't know, 4 all pros. I got to look it up. 6 Pro Bowls all decade. He might go to the Hall of Fame. Do people realize that? When you make an all-decade team, you're in the conversation. He's going to be a finalist to be a Hall of Famer. Whether he gets over the hump, that's up to Paul Domowitz and Ira Kaufman and Clark Judge and D. Orlando Ledbetter. We've had so many Hall of Fame voters on Birds 365, and we'll continue to have those guys. And I'll ask him about. He is going to be a finalist to go into the Hall of Fame. I don't know if people realize that. He was a great, great player. He's still a solid player. And I don't know why. I think a lot of people recognize that, but I think a lot of people don't recognize that.
Yeah, he's a 3-time second team All Pro, 1-time first team. And you're right. Ultimately, Fletcher's one of those guys that you want to have on your line of scrimmage, regardless of how you see it. And his career definitely should be appreciated when you think about it in totality. You said something really interesting earlier, just how, and we've talked about this, how disciplined the Philadelphia Eagles are. Sometimes it can be seen as a stubborn trait, but for the most part, they're very disciplined, and it's worked for them when you really think about the type of success they've had. At least since you've been covering the Eagles, and even prior to you covering the Eagles, they prioritized the trenches, and you actually see that same narrative holding true through this phase of free agency. Kelsey came back, BG came back, Fletcher Cox, and then you have Bradberry getting his contract, but then you still have CJ still waiting in the rafters as a free agent, Slay being cut. That discipline to the trenches is still holding true. Do you think that level of discipline is going to continue to, especially knowing they need a corner in this draft? Do you think they may prioritize the trenches in the first round? Do you think they may prioritize the corner in the first round? Or does it strictly depend on best available?
It strictly depends on best available. Jalen Carter's taken some big hits today. I don't even know if he'll be on the board because of the trouble that he got into down in Georgia, but we'll see how that shakes out. Evidently, he was 10 pounds overweight. He didn't look great at Georgia's pro day. So he's spalling. Really talented kid, obviously. The corners, I think a lot of people don't know the year the Eagles drafted Devontae Smith, they were going to take J.C. Horn.
Yeah, definitely.
And they were going to take Patrick Surtain. Horn first, Surtain second, Devontae third. And once Horn and Surtain came off the board, the Eagles shipped it to Devontae, had to trade up to get him. He was sort of the last guy they wanted. They started that process at number 12, and they traded up to number 10 to get him. And that was because Horn and Surtain went bang, bang off the board back to back. So a lot of these tropes that people say, the Eagles haven't taken a cornerback in 20 years. Well, that's because, there are other teams, there's 32 teams drafting. So sometimes you like a guy. Eagles wanted to draft Christian McCaffrey. That would have blown people's minds. The Eagles taking a running back in the first round of the draft. In 2017, they would have taken a running back in the first round of the draft. Now, Christian didn't get anywhere near number 14, but they were going to take him. And that would have blown out the whole running back. It's always about the player. But if it's even, and Howie said this last year in the second round with Cam Jurgens, Nakobe Dean, they were relatively even. They're taking the lineman. Always. So in other words, if Dom DeSandro says, yeah, Jalen Carter just, he's a good kid. He just made a mistake, blah, blah, blah. Jeffrey Lurie says, yeah, we can draft him. He gets back in shape, whatever, he does what he has to do. And the Eagles have a similar grade with him and Gonzalez and Witherspoon. They're taking the defensive lineman. So that's, if it's even, they're taking the lineman. If it's not even, they'll take the cornerback. They'll take the wide receiver. They'll take even the running back. Very rarely, even a linebacker. Very rarely, it would have to be a unique player like Christian McCaffrey. But it's always about the player.
So essentially, the Eagles have always just been victims of the board falling the way it has. It's not like they've avoided taking corners. It's not like they've
everybody's
avoided
a victim of the board. I mean, you like players and you can't get, it's common sense.
But
right?
if you don't like them enough to trade up, then you're going to obviously stay where you are.
Yeah, well, you also need, I think people assume, all right, trade up, trade down. Sometimes you want to trade up. You can't trade up because nobody wants to trade down. Sometimes you want to trade down. You can't because nobody wants to trade up to your spot. I think the assumption is by too many fans, oh, well, they'll just trade out of 30. Well, they probably want to trade out of 30. Can they trade out of 30? It's another conversation. If a team doesn't want to come up, always takes two to tango. And there's always players ahead. I mean, look at the New York Giants. When the Eagles draft, the Eagles specifically went ahead of the Giants because they knew the Giants were going to take Devontae Smith. And then the Giants traded down, made a big mistake with Kadarius Toney, and eventually traded him. You know, Eagles did it to Houston during the Andre Dillard draft. Houston was sitting there chomping at the bit to take Andre Dillard. All of a sudden, the Eagles go up, draft him, and they're like, oh, happens all the time.
So as we begin to close the show, John, once again, I appreciate the work you do, man. You provide a lot of insight. And we also appreciate you guys for staying locked in on the content and staying engaged. And make sure you smash that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to JAKIB Sports. And if you want more from John McMullen, check him out on jakibsports.com. That's JAKIB sports.com. There you'll find writing from him. Paul Domowitch, Joe Santiliquito, those guys do an amazing job covering the NFL and covering your Philadelphia Eagles. As we begin to close the show, John, like I mentioned, have you heard any updates, any movement on CJ Gardner-Johnson's market right now?
I think, and I predicted it on the show, you know, I think he'll be back with the Eagles. It's very clear at this stage that he thought he was able to get him back, I think, at a relatively cost-effective price.
Okay.
And that's a positive because that's a player the Eagles have wanted back, probably didn't think they could get back. But the market's not there. I mean, there's no way we're sitting here day 3 now. If the Javon Hargrave contract was there, the safety version of that, you know, there's no haggling. You sign it and you go. That deal's not there for CJ.
Yeah, it's either teams want to pay for that elite corner, as in Jesse Bates. Because remember, Jesse Bates, he has a longer resume of playing that safety position at a high level. Whereas though CJ Gardner-Johnson, he mainly spent time as a nickel in the NFL. And then he made that transition to safety only last year. And you only saw him in 12 games for the most part. Granted, he was productive. But I think you mentioned it on Birds 365. Although he made a lot of splash plays, he's a playmaker. He's a physical guy. He was still ranked just barely a top 50 safety in the NFL according to Pro Football Focus. So, do with that what you will, Eagles fans. But the fact that CJ Gardner-Johnson is still on the market right now, it says a lot. The fact that the Raiders were willing to pay Marcus Epps $6 million and skip over CJ Gardner-Johnson, knowing he's a better talent, the fact that they showed a willingness to want to go for the cheaper guy and the lesser talented guy, and then you saw Bates get his contract, it's kind of hard for those guys that's in between. It's either you get the money if you're the elite guy, or you got to settle for less on the dollar if you're not the elite guy.
Yeah, and remember, all teams aren't in the same position. Like if you're the Chicago Bears and you're flush with salary cap space, you can pay. Maybe the Raiders are on more of a budget. Juan Thornhill just signed with Cleveland, so they were looking for a safety. Gave him 3 years, $21 million. So $7 million a year, but more importantly for CJ, that's another team looking for a safety that made their decision, and it's not CJ Gardner-Johnson. As each move happens, it's more and more likely the Eagles are going to get back CJ Gardner-Johnson, probably at a number that the Eagles are very happy with.
That was my next question. What number do you think that is right now? I know I asked you what what's something you feel comfortable with? But at this point, knowing what we know about the safety market and how it's been moving, what do you think is the number that potentially CJ Gardner-Johnson
You
would
know,
come
I
back
keep
at? Or
going
could come back at?
down. I said
You said
10.
11, right? Or 12, right?
I started at 11. I went down to 10. Now I think you're in 7 figures. I think you're at 8 or 9.
Wow.
You know, and we'll see. It only takes one, but again, this deep into it, and it's, you know, Orlando Brown hasn't signed unless I missed it this afternoon.
He's still a free agent, I believe. Yeah.
And CJ's probably number 1 or number 2. Those are the guys that were expected to get big money deals that haven't gotten big money deals. That means it's not there at this point. Teams that go after top of the market guys, they're off quickly, and it's not a difficult decision. There's not 3 teams saying, we'll give you 14 million, CJ, and he's deciding between 3 teams. The money isn't there. It's only going to keep coming down the longer it goes.
So knowing what we know, could that prompt CJ Gardner-Johnson to maybe ask for a shorter deal so he can re-up later on? Maybe he'll take a 3-year deal, 2-year deal so he can re-up.
Yeah,
when his market is probably a little better.
It's what a lot of players are doing: sign 2 or 3-year deals and get back to the market. A lot of younger players, and CJ's in that category. So if he comes back on a 2-year deal, he can get back on the market at 27, 28, and maybe get another big deal, even bigger. Because, man, people are saying give him the franchise tag. Franchise tag is 14.46 at safety. You're not getting close to that. If he gets close to that, I will be shocked at this point.
You know, I have one more question for you, because I'm just so fascinated by the chess match that's played in the off season. A lot of fans become so enamored with the chess match on the field, but I feel like the bigger game, the larger game, is being played in the suites, in the boxes, right? We know, with the owners and the GMs. And it's so fascinating to me to watch his market evolve and morph the way it has, and just see how these owners and GMs are manipulating situations in the most business savvy way possible. Like, not first you decide not to franchise tag CJ Gardner-Johnson. You don't get too eager. You don't panic, because there's a human element involved in all this. We talk about it all the time, John. People forget about that human element in this. It's not just simple as pressing a button and, oh, you signed a guy, oh, you re-signed a guy, you cut. It's not Madden. There's a human element involved in this thing. And for Harvey Roseman and those guys to be able to remain disciplined at the franchise tag deadline, not franchise tag them, allow the market to play out the way it is, and still you were able to re-sign James Bradberry. Still, you were able to bring back BG, Kelsey, Fletcher Cox, and CJ Gardner-Johnson, most likely, based off everything we know, has a strong chance of coming back to Philly on a cheaper number than what he expected. This chess match is honestly a spectacle.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles are really good at it. That's one of Howie's strengths is sort of valuation of the market, understanding where everybody fits in. That doesn't mean he gets it right all the time. But I would say, his 2 strengths are, as a GM, are valuation, understanding where people fit, both not only when it comes to draft picks, but also money and what we're talking about, where they're going to land on the spectrum, and then contingencies. I always say, I always go back to wide receiver last year. Eagles wanted to trade for Calvin Ridley. Didn't work out because he pulled out a gambling app and got suspended. Then they wanted to sign Christian Kirk, but they're very disciplined. Jacksonville overpaid. At the time, actually, Christian had a very good season for him. They're very happy with it. The Eagles said, Godspeed, go sign the deal. Then it was Robert Woods. and Robert decided for whatever reason he wanted to go to Tennessee. Didn't work out there. Got cut. Now he's in Houston. Then it was Allen Robinson, and he wanted to go play for the Super Bowl champions, the Rams at the time. Even worked out worse for him. And after all of that, failure, the contingency was A.J. Brown on draft night.
That's a hell of a parachute, I'll tell you that.
Exactly. Even at safety, they wanted Marcus Williams. But again, discipline. Baltimore paid more than they were willing to go. Then it was Honey Badger. There was a third one I forget off the top of my head. And then August 30th, they still needed a safety, and they made the trade for C.J. Gardner-Johnson. He's very good with contingencies. A lot of GMs go, damn, I didn't get my guy. I'm screwed. Let's go with who we have, cross our fingers. Howie's always got layered plans in place. And that's why, the first couple of days, it's like they got Bradberry in June. They got Gardner-Johnson on August 30th. They got Linval Joseph in November. I mean, you got to learn from history.
Man, say what you want about Howie Roseman, man. His level of discipline is uncanny. And you've covered this game for a long time, John. Has there ever been a team or a GM that you've seen operate in this way, that with such discipline, with such poise? Is there anybody doing it on his level right now at the GM spot? Have you ever covered a team, seen anywhere that with seeing a guy just be this disciplined in their philosophies and how they want to build their team and just in deal making and so on and so forth? Is there anybody that you've seen have this level of discipline and poise?
No, but that's not Howie Roseman. That's Jeffrey Lurie.
Okay, break that down for me, please, because Jeffrey Lurie, he's not necessarily the football guy, but
he allows Howie Roseman to do that. See, most GMs are GMing for their jobs, so they can't be patient like Howie. If they make glaring mistakes, they're going to get fired. Howie's entrenched because Jeffrey trusts him and Jeffrey gives him the long leash. Most GMs don't get to hire multiple coaches, for instance. Jody on this show said many times, if you're going to fire Doug Peterson, you should have fired Howie Roseman. Well, it doesn't work that way in Philadelphia. It works that way everywhere else. Guys get fired. So, Howie can take a luxury pick like Jalen Hurts or Cam Jurgens or Nakobe Dean. Other GMs might want to take a player, but they can't take a player because they got to get a player on the field at a position of need. Jeffrey Lurie is a big part of Howie Roseman's success, because he's not GMing for his job. He can think about things long term.
Wow. You guys heard it here first, man. This is going to be and still will be an eventful offseason. Fletcher Cox is back, BG is back, Kelsey's back, James Bradberry is back, Slay is gone for now, but we'll see how that thing pans out. I think that's a pretty much a foregone conclusion, but we'll see how it pans out still. C.J. Gardner-Johnson is still on the market. So listen, a lot of stones have still yet to be unturned. We still have the draft. We still have everything after June 1st. We still, Howie Roseman made a lot of his moves in August. So Eagles fans, remain calm, remain poised, remain disciplined like your general manager, Howie Roseman. It ain't easy, but it is possible. John, I appreciate you so much, man. The way you discuss the game, the way you break down the game, your insight, your experience, it's something to admire, and I really appreciate the hard work you do. It never goes unnoticed, especially with me. You guys have been locked in on Football 24/7 with John McMullen. I was your humble host, Tone DeShields II. This is JAKIB Sports. Smash that like button. Remain engaged. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. And if you want more from John McMullen, check him out on jakibsports.com. That's JAKIB Sports.com. There you'll find his writing along with Paul Domowich and our guy, Joe Santalaquito. They all do great work. So smash that like button. Don't go anywhere, you guys. One love, stay humble, stay healthy, and most importantly, stay hungry. Take care.
Go for the pulls and the pools. Go for the oohs and the ahs. Go for the bubbles and the bubbly. Go for the story and the stories. Go for the win. Go to Ocean Casino Resort. Book your trip at theoceanac.com.